ठीक है जी, what are we covering today? We are covering React returns. Basically, what exactly does React return inside a component and why it needs to be a single child and not multiple. We'll get to what that is. Something called re-rendering, keys, wrapper components, and some popular hooks. We have done use state until now. We'll understand use effect, use memo, use callback, use ref. These are the link to the slides. If we can cover everything today, I think it's great. If not, some of these, the things that are left at the end, happy to defer for tomorrow or cover in an offline video. All right, let's kick things off. React component returns. We have written a React component many times. Hopefully a few times you've written it now. And you might have noticed, I discussed this a few classes ago, okay? Whenever you're returning something off from a React component, you cannot return two siblings or multiple siblings. Seems like I'm missing something again. Nope. You cannot return multiple siblings. What does that mean? That basically means that your return function needs to have a single top level, either div or something else, inside which you can have multiple children. Never can you return two children side by side. Why is that? There are a few reasons for this. You don't need to understand them well. It's good if you know them. It is a mildly popular interview question as well. Okay, what is the reason that a component needs to return a single child and not multiple siblings? And the answer is, the biggest reason is it makes it easy to do reconciliation. What was reconciliation? The process of figuring out what DOM updates need to happen as your application grows. That's the biggest reason as to why a component should return a top level div. As you can see, this is a component, this is a component. This one returns a top level div, and then a title that is rendered here and /div. This one returns two siblings, and when you write this code locally on your machine, you will see red squigglies here. If you hover over it, it will give you an error that says, XYZ has happened, and the error would be pretty descriptive. The error would clearly state you have two children. You cannot have two children. You can have a single child. Similar to China. Okay. Let's try to code this locally. Create a React app that has a header component that takes a title as a prop and renders it inside a div. Basically, the same thing you saw in the last slide. And the top level app component that renders two headers. Basically, the same thing you saw in the last slide. Let's try to code it locally. The solution is here. But let's try to code it together. Okay? What are the steps to start a React application locally? Step number 1, go into Visual Studio Code or go into your terminal. Let me do that. I would urge you to do the same. Once you're in your terminal, go to whatever folder where you want to create this empty project. I'm going to go to projects 100x devs /cohort2. and run npm create vt@latest. Give it a project name. I'm going to call it week-6-experiments. You can call it whatever you want. Select React as the framework here. Going to take a pause here. If you're still opening the terminal, it's fine. If you don't have Node installed locally until now, then it's a problem. But if you have Node installed locally, then this command should just run. Select a project name, name it whatever you want. Select the framework as React. Select the language as JavaScript. And you should see a new folder created on your machine. Now open this folder in Visual Studio Code. Okay? 30 seconds for everyone. Open this in Visual Studio Code. $20 more seconds to go. Oh, okay, I can do that. Please do this while I re-upload the slides in a better format. Apparently the slides are not in the PDF format. And try to do this assignment locally as well if you're already there. All right, PDF, next, 6.11. Okay. Let me quickly upload this. Till the time, I would urge you guys to try this assignment out locally. If you want a hint, the solution is here, but would urge you to do it yourself. All right, receiving a call from someone from the team. Seems like I'm missing something here. All right, this is the link to the slides, the new link to the slides. Feel free to copy it. हाँ भाई, हाँ भाई. Okay, cool. You guys can also go to Discord, and in Discord you'll find a link to PDF and all the resources for today. Just go to the 6.11 group. All right, let's get to solving the assignment. This is the URL. Feel free to screenshot it. You'll find the PDF here. All right, moving on. The assignment says create a React app. We have created an empty React app. It has a header component that takes a title as a prop and renders it inside a div. Hopefully this is straightforward by now based on the things we've done until now. If not, that's fine. Let me show you. Firstly, if you've done Vite, whatever, remove app.css, remove index.css. Let's create a clean project. Let's not have all this boilerplate CSS for us. Boilerplate basically means some demo things that it provides you to give you a cleaner app. We will work with an ugly app. Let's clean app.jsx as well. Let me put a div here. And now let me look at what the problem statement was. The problem statement says now easy way to do this. Create a header component that takes a title as a prop and renders it inside a div. All right, let's do that. A component called header takes title as an input and returns it, renders it inside a div. A few questions to ask at this point. Harkirat, what is this syntax? This is object destructuring. Harkirat, can I do it like this? Yes, you can. Both will do the same things. This also works. The other one is a slightly cleaner syntax. Okay, you destructure props here into a title variable and then render it directly here. And what was the second thing that was asked of us? The top level app should render two headers, which basically means I can render a header here, give it a title Harkirat1. You can close it like this, or you can close it like this. And then another one, let me give it a title header2. This is what was expected from the assignment. If you were able to do this, you are at a decent pace. If you weren't able to do this, you might have missed a few classes before. This much should be straightforward. And if you open this inside a browser now, to do that, first terminal, new terminal, minimize this. Let me wait for 20 seconds here for you guys to catch up. Try to write all of this code locally if you haven't yet. Going to wait for 20 seconds. Cool. The next thing you have to do is inside the terminal on week 6 experiments, run npm install to install all the dependencies. That includes things like React or the other dependencies that you can find here in package.json if you are inquisitive. If not, that's fine. And once you run npm install, run npm run dev. And once you do, if you go to the browser, you will see Harkeerath 1 rendered and Harkeerath 2 rendered, which is exactly what our app does. Simple, straightforward. If I make this B, then bold Harkeerath 1, Harkeerath 2 gets rendered. If I make this italic, then italic 1 gets rendered. You guys get the idea. I have created a component. I am using this component twice. Now, you might ask, Harkeerath, why are you creating a top level div? There is no need for it. Why aren't you doing this? And this is when, as you can see, React is erroring out really bad here. If I hover over it, it says JSX expressions must have one parent element. Any expression like this, JSX means JavaScript XML, any such expression that you're trying to return or, even store in a variable, you cannot do let a equal to, header and then header. It'll give you an error. Similar to, you cannot do something like this, right? 2 or, hello world space hello world. You can't store two siblings in the same variable. Similarly, you can't return two sibling components or an XML which does not have a top level parent. Harkeerath, this is HTML. Why are you calling it XML? I've said this many times. This isn't exactly HTML. Neither is this div HTML. Neither is this header HTML. It's actually XML. Somehow under the hood, this gets converted into a div. But what you store here in a JSX file stands for JavaScript XML. And whenever you're writing code like this where you have to return two things, you create a top level parent. Harkeerath, that basically means, if I refresh this, if I save this and refresh, that basically means you have introduced an extra div, which is not really needed. If you look at it, you added this extra div, which has two children. I don't want this extra div. There is no need for it. Why are you creating a bigger HTML code than there is a need for? Great question. You don't need this div and you can actually get rid of it. React lets you do something like this. You can create an empty tag and that is good enough. This still is able to become the parent of these two children. And if you look at the final HTML, you don't have the extra div that you had. You still have this div, but this is the root div that comes from index.html if you remember. These two don't have a parent now in the final render, even though you put a parent here. I repeat, you put a parent here, but it's sort of an empty parent, right? Does not have any wajud, is not a div, is not a span, is nothing. Which is why in the final HTML render, you see these as siblings, which is exactly what we wanted. You can do this. You cannot do this. And if you want, you can also do one more thing, which is react.fragment, which does the same thing. Okay, this is a code fragment. This is the parent for those fragments. And this also finally will not render an extra div here. This having a react.fragment or this both do the same thing. All right. That was the first thing we had to discuss today. And this is the final code for it that you had to eventually write. Okay, a header component, a parent component that renders both of these. You can render multiple if need be, but all of these need to have a single parent, which this guy returns. This guy cannot return multiple siblings together. Cool. That's the first one. Take 10 seconds to marinate this, and then we will proceed to the next one. Let me do a quick recap for everyone who weren't able to catch up / join late. First thing we did today was went to the terminal and ran npm create wheat at the rate of latest. It asked us a few things, gave it a few things, created an empty React project, removed everything from app.css and index.css, wrote this final code, explored you can't return multiple children. You have to return a single parent, which is what we returned here, and we're good to go. You can write react.fragment here as well. You can also from React restructure fragment and return this. That is less of a React thing, more of a JavaScript thing. You can either import React here and then do a react.fragment or destructure React fragment from React and render it here. Cool. That's the first one. Spent a decent chunk of time here. And this is the final solution. Okay, you can either have a top level React fragment or you can have a div. Both of these are good solutions. This is a slightly better solution because it doesn't introduce an extra DOM element, which this guy does. Cool. That's it for the first part. Quickly show the run command again. It's npm run dev. All right, run the command npm run dev, and that should start the project for you locally. Cool. Before that, you have to run npm install. All right, that was the first thing for today. We are done with the first part of the first section. If you remember, this is what we are covering today. We have done React returns. Let's get to re-rendering, which is a slightly more interesting concept because it's more visual. I have many times introduced the terms re-render when I say React. What was a re-render if you remember? I said any time a final DOM manipulation happens, anytime React actually updates the DOM is what's considered as a re-render. Let's visualize that a little bit better. Would urge you to install this specific extension. Very long link, Harkirat, I do agree. So you can either search React Dev Tools and the first result that you reach, install that in your Chrome, because it'll be much more fun if you have this installed locally and you're trying to play with it rather than just looking at the screen. This is the link for it, very long link. Let me post it in chat, but generally just Google React Developer Tools. It will show you an extension. Install that Chrome extension to see all of these visualizations locally. Okay, this is the one. It's called React Developer Tools. If you install it, you will see something like this installed. Going to give you guys 30 seconds. Fifteen more seconds, guys. Five, 4, 3. All right. Let's try to visualize re-renders a little bit. Why do you need React? React creates what's called dynamic websites. What is a dynamic website, Harkirat? A website whose content changes very quickly. You know, something like LinkedIn. If you scroll down on LinkedIn, you see more and more posts get appended to the bottom of LinkedIn. That's what is a dynamic website. React lets you is an easy way to create these. Anytime such dynamic features happen, which basically means you append something to the DOM, you remove something from the DOM, or you update something inside DOM, is what's called a re-render. A good example of this might be the counter app that we have created many times. Okay. There is a screen, there is a button, and the button has a count here called 0. If you click on the button, this updates to 1. If you click on it again, it updates to 2, so on and so forth. This is a good example of a re-render. Anytime the click isn't a re-render, you clicking on it isn't a re-render. The logic that is actually updating this 0 to go to 1 to go to 2, whenever that DOM updates happens, is what's called a re-render. React may, whenever you have React or any framework like this, you are creating dynamic websites, and the rule of thumb is you want to minimize re-renders. You will not see any performance issues for a small application. For most websites, frankly, it does not really matter. Re-renders are, even though they are expensive, they're not as expensive. Your naked eye can see and tell you, oh, this application is not written very well. But if you're writing a mobile app in React Native, or if you're creating a game, is when, you know, re-renders become super necessary for you to consider and minimize. You want to minimize the number of re-renders, by which I mean, let's say this is a button here and there was hello world written here. And then there was something hello world 2 written here. Anytime you update this 0, should this re-render? Should this be removed from the DOM and re-added to the DOM? Probably not. Should this re-render? No need. If these are static texts, they shouldn't re-render anytime this button is changed. Only the button should keep on re-rendering, right? But you will see in React how you can write code in a way when this is the only thing that should have been re-rendered, but this re-renders as well, this re-renders as well. That is when you need to add some optimizations to make sure you are only re-rendering the things which currently need to re-render. The static parts can remain the same. So let's understand how can you visualize re-rendering in React, and then how can you minimize the number of re-renders to make sure you're writing an optimal app. Cool. Let's go back to the slides. Update the last application to allow the user to update the title of the first header with a new title. So you now have to write some code again. The existing app was my name is Harkirat, my name is Raman. Now I tell you, put a button at the top, and clicking on the button should change the title of the first header to be my name is some random number right here. And there is a hint, K. If you run the global function math.random, it gives you a random number between 0 to 1. Okay? In the existing code that we had, try to update the code to add the button. At the very least, you can add the button. Try to update it in a way so that you introduce a state variable which contains the title of the first specific sentence here, and then pass it down as the prop. Figure it out from here. This is the problem statement. Going to give you guys a minute to try it locally, and then I will do it on my machine as well. Math doesn't return 1, sir. Math.random returns you a random number between 0 and 1. All right. This is the original code, and you guys have to add the button here. We have 15-20 more seconds here. Try to write it yourself. Cool. I'm assuming this part is straightforward. Adding a button at the top is straightforward. I'm assuming another thing that's straightforward is you realized until now you have to create a state variable that will keep getting updated so that the header actually re-renders. Const title, comma set title equal to use state. Initialize it with something. Hopefully these parts were straightforward. Harkirat, we will be passing down a title here to the first header. The first header is the only one where you need to do this. The second one can still have a static string. And you will define a global state variable, which when you click on this button needs to update. Now comes the most difficult part of here. Okay, what happens when you click on this button? A function should get called. This is the syntax to actually call a function when a button is clicked. Harkirat, why not this? We've discussed this. This is how React expects whenever you want a function to get called when a button is clicked, you have to just give the name of the function and not actually call it. All right. What needs to happen here? You need to update the title to be what? It needs to be my name is a random number. Original thing needs to be my name is Harkirat, or whatever your name might be. Here it needs to update, which basically means set title to what? My name is math.random. Is this enough? Is this what was expected from you? Update the title anytime you click on the button. Now I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds to catch up. Try to write this yourself on your machine as well. Seems like this is going to be a long class, but it's fine. We can extend until 9:30, 10. I don't have anything to do. We'll go slow, but let's try to cover all these things one by one well. And let's try to make you code. And we'll do a poll in the middle. If you don't like this approach, I'm happy to just code myself as well. But I think this is slightly better. Okay. 15 more seconds. Try to catch up and try to write this code locally. Maybe try to test it on your machine. Is it working or not? All right, going to run npm run dev again. Unable to expand. There you go. So I ran npm run dev for the people who cannot see niche. If I run this, click on it, this thing is updating. This is what the original expectation was. Ki haan, the first guy should update, second guy should not update. Okay. If you were able to catch up until this point, it's fine. If not, it's fine, leave it. You can try it after the class. Any of the assignments from here don't have this as a base assignment, so you can just target the next one. Okay. If you're not able to do it until now, leave it. If you are able to do it, great. Let's try to look at what re-renders. Now, what do you think should re-render? We discussed this on the iPad a few minutes ago. What exactly is changing? The contents of this thing. So what exactly should React update? What exactly should React re-render? It is this first header component. Should it re-render the second header component? No, Harkirat. The second header component hasn't changed, so it shouldn't re-render it. Should it re-render this whole parent component? Doesn't seem like it, Harkirat. Only this thing has changed. Only this thing should re-render ideally. Okay. Let's try to see what re-renders. Click on inspect. So right click, inspect. And if you have installed the extension correctly, you should see two things here, components and profiler. Try to go to components here. And you should see a very nice component structure here. This is the second header, this is the first header, this is the app top level component. Here you will see a settings icon. Click on it and select highlight update when component renders. Make sure you have this checkbox ticked. Going to give you guys 10 seconds. I'm going to repeat all the steps. Right click, inspect, components, settings, and then check highlight updates when component renders. This lets you do a bunch of things, the React dev tools that we installed. The one thing that we are focused on for now is to see what is updating anytime I click on the button. Okay. If you have checked this, refresh the page, wait for these components to load, wait for something for you to see something here, and then basically wait for 5-6 seconds, then click here. You will see a few boxes are being created. These boxes represent that a render or a re-render has happened. And as you can see, it shows you the button is getting re-rendered. Not exactly the button, I'll share what exactly is getting rendered, what exactly is not getting rendered. It's a little hard to see amongst these boxes what is getting rendered. But if you look at it, there is a blue box created at the top button. There is a blue box created in the middle. Seems like there is a blue box created at the end also, which means all three are getting re-rendered. Hard to tell, kind of. They're like very closely stacked together. So do this for me. Introduce a few more headers here, a few more static headers. Okay? Harkira 2, Harkira 3, Harkira 4, whatever you want to call them. And then rather than fragment here, maybe make it a div. Okay? Maybe you already had a div, which is great. But if not, create a div so that it takes the whole window and then the button and then a dynamic header and then a bunch of static headers. This is the final code. And now if you look at this code rendered here, refresh, wait for this to load and click on it. You see boxes everywhere. You see, I'll tell you what you actually see. There is an outer box here, which means the app has re-rendered. And then there are individual boxes here. Header has re-rendered, header has re-rendered, header has re-rendered. The button exactly hasn't re-rendered. The button isn't even a component, right? This is some HTML. You might look at it and feel ki haan Harkira, there is a box at the top, which basically means the top button has also re-rendered. That actually hasn't rendered. That isn't even a component here. App is a component. So there is an outer box actually. And then there is one box here, one box here, one box here, one box here, one box here. There is no explicit box here, but since there is a upper line here, you think that there is a box here as well. There isn't. You can confirm it somehow. You can, I don't know, maybe add some space here. Is there an easy way to confirm this? No, 30, never mind. High level, you see bunch of things getting re-rendered, even though ideally, Harkirat, I only expect a box to be here. My name is this thing. Only this thing should get re-rendered. And ideally, app should also get re-rendered because, if this is getting re-rendered, basically means if one of the children is getting re-rendered, probably it means the parent has also sort of re-rendered if you look at it technically. Okay? But ideally, this is the only thing that should render, Harkirat. Everything is rendering now. Why? Great question. This is a visualization of what is wrong. Let's see why it is wrong and how can you fix it. We have added this. Hopefully you've flipped this by now and you can actually see all the re-renders happening. A re-render means that React did some work to calculate what all should update in that specific component. The component actually got called. You can actually put a log here to confirm. What do I mean when I say the component actually got called? It means what is a component? It is a function, right? So whenever a function re-renders, whenever you're seeing a box, if I put a log here, rendered, you will see this log in the console, which means re-rendering actually means this function was called by React. This is effectively a function only, right? Only it starts with an H and returns some XML, but it is a function. Anytime you are seeing a box here, it means a re-render has happened. It means control has reached here. This thing would get logged actually. You can actually confirm that. The inspector shows you a bounding box around that component. It happens when, number one, a state variable that is being used inside a component changes, or a parent component re-renders, triggering all the children re-rendering. Second one is important. First one says, if a state variable that is being used inside a component changes, that component re-renders, which basically means, if you look here, the app is a parent component which uses title. Harkirat, it doesn't use it. It only passes it down. I get it, but still does not have to explicitly use it. If it is present in the lifecycle of this specific component, React fields/React ka logic says that if set title is ever called, if title is ever updated, app would re-render, the parent would re-render. And what was the second point? Anytime a parent re-renders, all children render, irrespective of if this child has actually used title or not. Doesn't matter if this child is using title or not. If the parent re-renders, which means anytime set title is called, or if you had multiple states here, any one of these set is called, would trigger a re-render for the parent. And anytime a parent re-renders, all children re-render, which is why clicking on this button, if you wait for a few seconds, clicking on this button is rendering everything or re-rendering everything. Are we good here? Can we proceed? The next thing we need to understand is how do we prevent these re-renders? But up until this point, are we good? Okay, we can visualize re-renders locally. %. Good, not great, but okay. We'll continue a bit and then I will take doubts. At let's do a doubt session from 7:50 to 8 and a break for everyone who understands. Let's understand how can you fix this. You want to minimize the number of re-renders to make a highly optimal React app. The more components that are getting re-rendered, the worse. How can you minimize the number of re-renders in this application? This is our application. This is a cleaner version. It only has 2 titles, but it is the same code we've written until now. There is a title here. There is a change title function. There is a button clicking on which it updates the title and the title gets propagated to header. There are 2 ways you can fix it. Number one is you push the state down. If you look at the code on the right and compare it to the code on the left, here the state variable is defined here in the app component. But if you know that this state variable, first title, is only being used in the header, why not push it down to header? Which basically means if you look at the right, there is no state variable here. I have defined a new component called header with button. And if you look at the header with button component, here is where I've defined the state variable, which is changing when you click the button. So here I have a button, I have the specific header for that first title, and the state variable is here, which means anytime this thing gets called, header with button renders. Any of its children also re-render. One of these headers will re-render, but neither does app re-renders, nor does this guy re-render. This guy does not re-render. Header with buttons, just this guy re-renders anytime state changes. There is no state present here in the app. There is no state present here in the header. There is only state defined and present in header with buttons. Let's try to write this code ourselves locally and then see if this actually fixes what we're trying to fix. So what did I say? Let me remove a few here. Let me only have two. I said create a new component, call it header with button. It takes no inputs. And here inside header with buttons, write this down locally on your machine. I'll wait for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Solo. 10. Great. Now what did I say? I said push the state down to it. What does that mean? Remove the state from here, remove this button from here, remove this header from here. Push it all down to this header with button components. Can you do that yourself? Can you try it? It's just a bunch of copy paste. 15 seconds for you to try it and then I will do it. Try to push the state down. So your parent component does not have any state variables, because if it has a state variable, if the state variable changes, it re-renders, all children re-render, which is bad. 5 seconds. All right. This is what we had to do. Push the state down to header with buttons and return here the button and the header. And यहाँ पे I would render header with button. This was the change that was expected to make our application slightly more optimal. Let's see that in action. Let's see, has our application actually become more optimal, or was this just a fad? Notice there is no state variable here. State variable is only here. So ideally, yes. Ideally now, since the state is only here, only this thing should re-render. All these headers shouldn't. If I go to Google Chrome, refresh, you will see the component structure has changed. The first one is called header with buttons and then a bunch of headers. If I click on update, do you see only two things update? This guy right here and this guy. Yes. It basically means the header with button component re-renders, which has both the button and the header, which is why you see a bounding box here. None of these are re-rendering, which was the goal, to minimize the number of re-renders. That is one way to do it. Push the state down to a component. You will notice this many times through your journey of React. You will have to write components like this. There is a component which has a child component. Let's say 2 child components. This one has 3 child components. And always the goal is, if there is a state variable that needs to be used by this guy and this guy, then you keep it here. Basically keep it at the lowest common ancestor. Never keep it at the root. You can keep everything at the root if you want. But what is the problem? The problem is if a state variable changes, which is only being used either here or here or here, then this thing is unnecessarily re-rendering. This thing is unnecessarily re-rendering. So if you know, I need to define a state variable that only needs to be used here, here and here, you would ideally define it in their lowest common ancestor, which in this case is this guy, so that whenever this state, let's say, needs to change, it changes here. This re-renders, this re-renders, this re-renders, this re-renders, but neither does this re-render nor does this re-render, because if a parent state changes, all the children will re-render, but the parent does not re-render, right? This thing will re-render, all the children will re-render, parent will not re-render, which is why you try to push down the state as much as you can. Harkirat, why don't I push down the state here only? Why do you say put it to the lowest common ancestor? Because you can't push states up the chain. You can only push state variables down the chain, which is why If there is something this guy needs and this guy needs, it needs to be defined here and then passed down as props. You cannot be like, Harkirat, I will define it here, so only this guy re-renders, because there's no way for you to propagate that state variable here. Okay? Until we reach state management, which we'll try to reach by next week or tomorrow. This is the rule of thumb. Okay, if there are multiple children in a tree or multiple components that need to use a state variable, you find their lowest common ancestor and you store it there. Or you try to structure your app a certain way so that you can push it down as much as you can, which is what we've done in today's assignment. And now by the end of it, we have a working solution. This is a good solution, but you had to structure your app differently. You have to define a header with buttons, do all of these things. There is another way to do it. Let me press Command Z a few times. Let me revert everything I've done. This was the original solution, and the problem was there are unnecessary re-renders. Another solution is, you use something called react.memo, which the name itself says memoization. You can find more docs on this here. Let's go to the docs and quickly read what exactly this react.memo does. It says, memo lets you skip re-rendering a component when its props are unchanged. Isn't that exactly what we need? We want, bhai, Harkirat, props are unchanged. We want to skip re-rendering this when its props are unchanged. And react.memo lets you do exactly this. The question is, what is the syntax of it, Harkirat? The answer is, it's pretty straightforward. Few ways to do it. Whenever you're defining a component that you want to memoize, that you want to not re-render when its props haven't changed, you define it like this. This is how it's written right now. You can define it like this. Const header equal to react.memo, and to this react.memo function, pass in your component. So basically the function header that I had written, make an anonymous function out of it. Or if you want to keep it named, that is fine as well. Copy this anonymous function or total function and paste it inside a react.memo. Const header equal to react.memo of your final component. Basically, wrap it inside a react.memo. And now if I use this header component, which is wrapped inside a react.memo, where does React come from, Harkirat? Comes from here. Can I destructure memo here, Harkirat, and use it directly? Yes, you can. You can destructure memo here and use it directly if you want, or you can do a react.memo, both work. And now if you go here and refresh, you will see the structure is still as the original structure. And if I re-render, both of these are not re-rendering. Let me add a few more here so it's a little clearer to see. Look, this renders, the parent also re-renders, of course, but these individually don't re-render. I repeat, the parent does re-render. By app to changed, right? Set title changed. So app needs to re-render. The parent needs to sort of go through a re-render, but all these individual children, you don't see any bounding boxes here, which means react.memo knows / understands that the title has not changed. So I don't need to re-render these. Is this one also clear? Are we good until this point? 7:51, so we will take a break either way. But let me do a quick show you guys where we are at and where we have to go by today. We are over here. We understand the first two concepts now. We still have to cover this thing called keys and wrapper components, and then all of these things. We've only covered this and this until now, which means we need to speed it up a bit, but not too much, hopefully. Let's do a poll and see how we're doing, and then we'll do a 10-minute break. So we'll start at 8:02. For people who are in college, feel free to go to your mess. And now I'm going to look at the doubts session / the Q&A session. So 82%. Please post any questions you have in the Q&A section. I'm going to read from the end. Can you explain memoization again? Yes. Look at the docs. What does it say? Memo lets you skip re-rendering a component when its props aren't unchanged, which is exactly what we want, right? This is not the comparative programming memoization. We'll see that also very soon. This isn't exactly that. This is something else. Like, even though the name is very similar, this is ki haan bhai, doesn't matter if a component does not have any props also or has a static prop. It re-renders if the parent re-renders. But if you wrap it inside a react.memo, Then React says, I will only render this if this actually has a dynamic variable that changes or its states updates. Now, if I pass this in to the second one, then you will notice second one will also re-render. There you go. First and second are both re-rendering, right? But the rest of them you were able to memoize. Can you answer that? So if parent re-renders, then the following children also re-render. Yes. If a parent re-renders, then all children also re-renders, which means in this case all of them would re-render unless you have wrapped inside it in a react.memo, and whatever you have wrapped inside the react.memo, the props to that haven't yet updated. If title updates, then of course, even though header is inside a memo, it needs to re-render. It needs to update this title here, right? This dynamic thing has changed. But if it has a static thing, or if it has a prop that hasn't yet changed, that's what this guy says. Skips re-rendering component when its props are unchanged. How to clear backlogs and find solutions. Some assignments have solutions videos. Some assignments have have like description, textual solutions. Some of them you can find in like PRs as well. People have created PRs. Can you wrap full React website inside React memo? How would that be useful? If I put a react.memo here, but if I remove it from here, we will still have the same problem, right? Just because this is inside a react.memo, state variable changed here. So header re-renders will still happen. So you have to pick and choose, and just if you write, this doesn't even accept a prop. So this to वैसे ही never re-renders generally. So yeah, basically no, you can't hope everything not re-renders if you just wrap the parent. You have to pick and choose which specific component you feel can, be useful in this case. Okay, I'll do a full recap at 8 p.m. as well. Can't write a function logic which allows only specific children to use state and have it declare as an it in the app component. Ashutosh, I don't understand the question. In re-renders, only state part changes in the real DOM or the whole div component changes. Oh, that's a great question. No idea. Let's see. Let's expand this. Let's update it. Let's open the body. Let's look at all the divs. Seems like div is also changed. Like it is updating this specific thing as well, and not just the inner HTML. Look, purely based on the flash that is coming here. I think the flash that is coming here would be different if I go to the console and do a .in HTML equal to something else. So I feel like I could be wrong. I guess your question is div coming out and coming back in? I don't think that is happening. I think just the inner HTML is changing. If I had to, gun to my head if I had to guess. What re-render actually means? Is it creating all the variable state? That's a great question. Because re-rendering, React in itself does 10 different things anytime a state variable changes. If you have this app right now, React is doing nothing. It is chilling on the side. This app has pushed something on the DOM. It is there. Whenever a state variable changes, which means you click here and title gets updated, React does a bunch of things. There is something called the virtual DOM, which we discussed a few classes ago. Okay. React has an exact copy of this DOM somewhere else, which means it has all of this in an object somewhere. And anytime you change the state variable, click somewhere, it creates a new DOM virtually. Ki haan bhai, this was the original state. This is the new state. Tries to find the diff, and based on the diff calculates what it needs to do. Does it need to update things? Does it need to remove things? Does it need to add new things? And those are the final document.create element, document.update element, not update element, but you get the idea. .inner HTML or document.remove element calls that it actually does here inside the DOM. Can't we set state directly on click? You can do. So yeah, this is slightly cleaner syntax. You cannot do this. Don't do this. This is where you are calling the function which returns nothing. So you're showing on click equal to undefined. So don't do this. If you want to do this, this is the syntax to do it. Function, and then inside this function is where you call set title. Or if you want, you can put an arrow function here. What you cannot do, so this is right. The other thing I showed was right. You cannot do this because this means this is similar to this, because set title, it doesn't return anything, or maybe it does. Whatever it returns is what gets put here, versus this is the right way to do it. Can we pass the function of one component to another component? You can, but you will see problems there. We'll see that very soon. When we get to reach the use callback section, you'll see why that's a problem. Can we update the props of one component from another component? You can. This is sort of an anti-pattern now. You can, if you want to do that, you will do something like this, right? So let's say you will either define. So here you can pass set title here. I pass set title to the third one, and then this third one can call set title, which will update this global variable, which will update the value in this second component. So you can, but whenever you want to do that, you define, all the find the lowest common ancestor of all those children, and then have the state variable there, hoisted there, and then pass it down, pass set title down. You can pass set title down, and then call set title here, and then that will just update everyone. ESLint is erroring out. Code works, but VS Code tell me title is missing. Should we disable ESLint? Yeah, feel free to disable ESLint. I'm sure there's some basic simple thing you're missing. Feel free to disable ESLint for now. Can you explain use memo again? We haven't yet gotten to use memo. We have gotten to react.memo, which I explained a few times. So I'm hoping up to your answer is clear. Wouldn't recoil or redux render the entire app? So no, that's the whole point of recoil and redux. How do you minimize the number of renders, and how recoil and redux do it? Bro, need how to get video from your side. Okay, I'll try to do that. Does memo have any pitfalls? The long story short is no one memoizes. This is all good to know, but like when you are writing an application, you're moving really fast. You don't really care, all these individual things are re-entering on a website. This does end up mattering in a React native application. There you will very carefully pick and choose, what is wrapped inside a react.memo. But in a React application, doesn't really matter. What's lifting up the state then? Great question. So, basically this, you can have this here, or lifting up the state basically means putting it in a parent so that, all these children can share this state. This title can be shared by this guy also, and this title can be set by this guy also and this guy also. So that's the point of pushing it down. That's what I mean when I say pushing it down or pushing it back up the state. All right, 8 p.m. Okay. What was the setting? So it's present in the slide. So go to the slides, you'll find it. What if we put each component inside another file? It does not matter. I mean, whatever we've discussed until now remains exactly the same, irrespective of if this is defined here or if you go to a different file and define it here and export it from there and import it here. Is there a way to pass props from children to parents? So there is, but it's a very anti-pattern. You should never do this. Always, what you can do is you can, pass in a function here on change equal to something, and then have on change here, and then call on change here with whatever updates you have. That is the way to take a state variable here and pass it to the parent. Never do it. It's a very big anti-pattern to push state from a child to a parent. Always state should be pushed from the parent to the child. All right. Why header and not header? All components need to be defined with a capital H or capital letter, which is why it's not header, it is header. All right. What does render actually mean? Great question. Oh yeah, this is a hard to explain concept. What is rendering actually meaning? Anytime you see a box here is what's called render. Now, what does it mean in terms of React? It means React did some work on this component whenever this button was clicked. If you see a bounding box around a component, it means React has done some work, calculated some diffs, tried to update something in this specific component. That is what re-render means. Whenever you're on an application where a button is changing, for example, if I go to Google here and start a stopwatch, this DOM element is updating every second. This is a very quick render that is happening, every 1 second. This is not re-rendering. This is not re-rendering. This is not re-rendering. This is re-rendering very quickly. So that's what re-rendering means. All right, 8:02 ho gaye. Let me do a quick recap and then we will proceed. Let me do a quick poll as well. All right. The recap for today is we have until now only discussed 2 of the 8 things we have to discuss. What is re-rendering and what does React, basically that React needs to return a single thing and not multiple things. Okay? Third thing we will discuss is this thing called the key. 86%, which is good, not great. Scope for improvement, but let's do a doubt session at the end. Let's try to cover as many as we can until 8:45, and then we'll do a doubt session at the end. All right. Let's move to keys in React, or specifically keys is probably the wrong way to handle it. Keys in React. Let's create a simple to-do application that renders 3 to-dos. Create a to-do component that accepts a title description as input, initializes a state variable that has 3 to-dos, iterate over them and render all the to-dos, a button at the top level to add a new to-do. Chalo ji shuru ho jao. Again, you all have to put in the work, not me. Create a simple to-do application. Maybe I'll try to code alongside as well, slowly. Try to do all of these 4 things top to bottom. Just focus on one at a time. First thing you have to do is create a to-do component that accepts a title and description as input and renders it. Straightforward. Let me also do it on the side. Would urge you to do it independently. Okay? Create a to-do component, takes title and description as an input, renders it somehow. You can decide how you want to render it. I'll put the title in an H1 and then description in an H5. Okay? Yeah. This was the first part of what needed to be done. Take a moment. It's fine. Take like 15 seconds. Try to copy it. There is also a solution file at the end, so feel free to copy that if you want. And if you already done it, move to the second step that's expected from you. Second is initialize a state array that has 3 to-dos. So in the parent, probably should have written that. Define a state variable, the initial value of which already has 3 to-dos. You can put an initial value here. You can let it be an empty array and then, hit a server, get back response from there. Or you can be like, bhaiya, I'm going to write, this is the initial value that is hard coded for now, which can be whatever you want. Go to gym, description, go to gym today. Maybe, just maybe, give it an ID as well. So ID 1, title description, ID 2, title description, ID 3, title description. Feel free to rename it whatever you want. Take your time. Take like a minute to do it. No rush. And the people who have done it, read the third and the fourth section as well. Try to do it yourself. 40 more seconds here. $30 seconds. Ten more seconds, guys. All right. Third one, the mildly confusing syntax, which 90% of you understood in the last class. So I'm assuming you can do this now. Iterate over the array and render all the to-dos. Now this will be overwhelming if this is the first time you're seeing it, but we've done this 2-3 times now. So hopefully it isn't. To-dos.map, to-do, and then render the to-do component with the title, to-do.title, description, to-do.description, and then close it. Harkirat seems very overwhelming. Yes, you can also write it this way. To-dos.map, function, to-do, and then return title equal to to-do. Both of these syntax are fine. Harkirat, this also feels overwhelming. Now you can do this if you want, but that won't work. The third way to do it is this, okay. To-dos of 0.title, to-dos of 0.description, and do it for 1, do it for 2. But the problem is you can't. if the array updates, you won't be able to, you won't see the updates here. This is not the right way to do it. But under the hood, this for loop will also convert it into this only. This for loop is also converting it into this only. So get comfortable with this syntax as soon as possible. But last time I remember 90% said yes on this. So I'm assuming this is straightforward. Whichever one feels comfortable with you, it's fine. Last thing, a button at the top that adds a new to do. Last thing, I'm going to choose this one. Button, add a to do that needs to update the state variable and add another to do at the end. Now, how many of you remember the weird spread syntax we had done? One way of doing it is this, the spread syntax ID. So this is where we have to maintain some global ID logic, but okay, this is fine for now. And a random title and random description. This is one way of doing it. I get it is overwhelming. So the other way of doing it is const new to do's equal to empty array, and then iterate over all the original to do's. Push all the original to do's here, and then push another one. And then lastly, set to do's with this new to do's variable. If this syntax feels overwhelming, you don't have to do it. This also does the same thing, creates an empty array, pushes all the existing to do's to the empty array. So at this point, new to do's will be equal to old to do's, and then adds another variable here, adds another to do here, then sets to do's to this new to do's. Here it will become the existing ones plus one more to do. Then you set to do's with this new variable. Whatever syntax feels more comfortable. This one slightly longer, this one slightly uglier as well. This is actually the better, cleaner syntax to do it. But if you don't understand the spread operator yet, it will be slightly hard. But what it does is basically spreads all the existing to do's, and then you add the fourth one at the end, which is why the final array becomes the existing 3 to do's and then the final one. Take 30 seconds. This is all that was expected from this assignment. Let me zoom out a bit so you can look at the whole thing together. Okay, it's very big. There you go. 30 seconds, marinate, look at it, and then we will proceed. We will see the key thing that I'm talking about. What are keys? How do you use them? Why do you need them? But take your time. 30 seconds, no, now 20 seconds, marinate it, and then we will proceed. Try to run it locally, see if it works, see if you see 3 to do's. If you click on the button, you see 4 to do's, 5 to do's, like that. And again, 2 overwhelming bits here are either this syntax or this syntax, which either one of them you can use. I am actually going to use the cleaner syntax. Would actually urge you to use the cleaner syntax as well. All right. 10 more seconds. All right. When I render this, I see 3 to do's. If I click on it, I see one more to do added. Click on it, one more to do added. Great. Seems like our app does what it's supposed to. Of course, it is very ugly. What is this title? What is the description? It's fine. Good enough start. We can optimize this better. The one thing that's missing here is the ID is hard coded to 4. It should increment. If this has 1, this is 2, this is 3. It should become 4 the first time, 5 the next time, 6 the next time. And for that, what you can do is define a global variable, call it counter, and initialize it to 4. You have 1, 2, 3 here. Then you can just do counter plus plus here, so that counter keeps on getting incremented. Here, is this a state variable? No, this is a normal JavaScript variable defined outside. And the reason it's defined outside is because if you paste it here, then anytime app re-renders, this counter also becomes 4 again, which is why I've kept it as 4 here. If you don't understand this, it's fine. This counter logic isn't, you don't really have to worry about IDs. Like usually you'll get these to-dos from the backend, which will have the IDs in there. So you don't have to worry about this logic yourself. But I'm hoping it's not too difficult. Okay, refresh, add to-do works as expected. Open the console and you will notice a big error. What does the error say? If I'm able to, there you go. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Some big error came here. Let's look at what this is. You can also read the warning here. It takes you to a link. It says each child in a list should have a unique prop. This is usually a good way to debug. Whenever you're in React, you see an error, it gives you a page where you can find more information. Most probably if you have this code locally, which again, if you don't have it locally right now, go to the slides, you will find a gist to the solution here. So feel free to just copy this over. And when you run it locally, you see this error that's present here in the slides as well. You see it here as well. If you look at this error, what does it say? You need to give each array item a key, a string or a number that uniquely identifies it amongst the other elements in an array. Li key equal to person.id. Key tells React which array item each component corresponds to so that it can match them up later. It becomes important if your array items can move due to sorting, get inserted or get deleted. A well-chosen key helps React infer what exactly can happen, what exactly has happened, and make the correct updates to the DOM tree. Rather than generating keys on the fly, you should include them in your data, which is what we've done as well. This is a good example of their data where they have a people's array, we have a to-dos array, and we have an ID in our data itself, which is what they're saying. Rather than generating keys on the flies, you should include them in your data. And what is the thing it asks us to do? It says, give a key to every element. Basically, this is the part that is problematic. If I uncomment this, and if I go back, you will see there is no error. But if I comment this out, if I uncomment this now, you will see the error appears. Because whenever you are rendering an array in React, to make sure React knows कि हाँ भाई, this was the first to do, this was the second to do. If you ever flip these, if you sort these a certain way, even if you add or remove from it, React can easily get confused कि हाँ भाई अच्छा, what was the first element, what is the second element, and it just will increase the number of renders that are happening in the end. The reason this is sort of necessary, as you see, the application did not break. It still worked. It gave you a warning, but it still worked. And it will still work if you add more elements, flip them, sort them, whatever you want to do. But if you add a key here, which in our case will be todo.id, which is the way to uniquely identify a to-do here, then number one, the warning goes away. Number two, React is able to figure out when you move these elements कि हाँ अच्छा, one has moved later on, so let me copy over this existing DOM element and move it here, rather than removing it, and then adding it. So this is what IDs lets it do. Okay, if you sort your array, if you add more elements, remove more elements, React understands कि हाँ भाई, this is the key for that specific to do. Whenever a re-render happens in the virtual DOM, it has all the existing keys. In the new DOM, it has all the new keys, and it is able to basically more optimally render things here. Don't understand it. Not too important to understand why this is an issue or like why this is needed, but definitely important to write it the right way. Important to write it the right way. WRITE it the right way. It basically means whenever you're rendering a list, make sure your list has some unique identifier for every element, and make sure key equal to that specific unique identifier you are providing. If you don't, in React Native especially, like there have been PRs of mine where I've been told to explicitly add this because it can get extremely unoptimal if you don't have the right keys present or passed to a child. Okay? That is why you need a key. That is what a key is, this KEY thing. And where do you need it? Whenever you're iterating over an array. Do we understand the syntax? Do you understand what we need to do? If we don't understand why this is needed, that is totally fine. But do we understand the syntax for it and how anytime you're rendering a list, you need something like this, a key? Oh, great. Not great. 81%. Oh, 1 second. Receiving a call. Am I lagging? I'm assuming I'm lagging. हाँ भाई, अच्छा got it. Code zoom in कर देते हैं. Let me again create a gist of what I've done here. So if you haven't yet been able to follow along, you can. This part, the important thing to know, which 20% are not understanding right now, which is a big number, so we will pause here a little bit, is that whenever you are rendering a list, which is what is happening here, ignore this, ignore the add to do logic, ignore everything else. If you have a list, an array that you're rendering, you need to give every element whenever you're rendering the component, even though as you can see, it does not take key as an input here. You still have to provide it as an input here. And what does it, why do you need it? Harkiyat, this ID is not being rendered here. I did not write key here. I did not write key here. What is the purpose of providing the ID here? The purpose is that the React library, whenever it is trying to calculate diffs, it gets really complicated for it to understand what has changed unless you provided ID. If you don't provide ID, let's say this did not have an ID. If your input was like this, and then let's say in a re-render, you moved this to the top. What was the thing? This was the original thing. No IDs anywhere, no key over here. And then in a re-render, you moved this to the top. How does React know that you moved the last thing to the top? Will it match titles? Will it match description? Inki to all three of these have the same title description. How does it know that in the DOM it needs to remove the last thing and add one thing to the top? It does not. If you don't pass it keys, it does not know. So what will it do? It will remove everything and re-add everything. So, but if you pass in a key here and tell it that bhai, the last one's ID was 3, this is ID is 2 and this is ID is 1, and you update, then it knows that the thing with the ID 3 has been moved to the top, which basically means I can remove this from the DOM and then re-add this to the top. I don't have to change this or this. So that is what ID lets you do. It tells React that this is the ordering, this is what the first one is, second one is, third one is. And whenever there is a state update that has happened, it understands that this one hasn't changed, this one hasn't changed, this one has changed, this one has moved here, this one has been updated, so on and so forth. It makes the re-rendering slightly easy for it. Don't worry about the counter logic. Don't worry about the update logic. Irrespective of if you're updating the to-dos or not, you still need to, whenever you're rendering it, pass in a key which uniquely identifies that specific to-do, even though this key is not being used here. Okay? Hopefully that's slightly better. Either way, we'll have to proceed, but we'll do a doubt session at the end for if this feels a little confusing. The thing to definitely know is the syntax. The thing that is, even if you don't understand, it's fine, is why it is needed and why React, Okay, good. That explanation was good. Okay, let's proceed. 2 keys are done. The last thing in the first section was wrapper components. So this is something we did in this week's YouTube live. I was trying to create this application, which is a lead code clone thingy. This isn't exactly a lead code thing, but very close. And if you look at its UI, we had to copy its UI. There are a bunch of cards here, right? This is a card, this is a card, this is a card. What do I mean by card? Something that has a shadow, appears, and then the text inside is different. But all of these cards have a similar outer style. You can see, they have some shadow, they are white in color compared to the background. Let's say you want to build this. You will notice a lot of cards on the screen on the right. All of these are cards. You can create a wrapper card component that takes the inner React component as an input or as a prop more specifically. Even if you go to the live stream from last week, before I let other people create components, I usually when I'm on my YouTube live stream, I let other people create them. Before I did that, I created a wrapper component myself so that every person does not create their own version of cards. I told people, okay, bhai, you write all the logic inside, you write all the logic inside, you write all the logic inside. Don't write the logic for the card. I will write the logic for the card. And when I was writing that logic, you will notice, the way I wrote it was by creating a wrapper component, which basically means the component takes another component as an input. Here it will take, this component as an input. Here it will take this progress, all of this as an input. Here it will take this as an input. How do you create a component which can take another component as an input and then, render it correctly? This is the solution for it, but let's try to again code it ourselves. The first thing you have to do is, so remove everything, create an empty React app again, going to give you guys 10 seconds. I have an app. I have, let's call it, you can call it card or you can call it card wrapper. Feel free to call it whatever. And let's remove everything here. What does card wrapper need to do? It needs to accept some React component as an input and then render that React component here inside some extra styles, background white, box shadow, things like these. Try to write it a little bit yourself. Let me give a hint. You can do something like this, right? Card wrapper, inner component equal to some component. Let's call it text component and then close it. And let me define the small hint I've given. Let's say this is the boilerplate you're dealing with. Can you somehow figure this out? Can you somehow, I hope you understand the problem statement, and can you, basically this is the thing that you have to fill now. Can you somehow create a div which has a border? Hint, the way to create a border is border 2 pixels solid black. This is the CSS for it. And inside the div renders the prop. Try to do this yourself. Going to give you guys a minute to try it out. After 30 seconds, I will also try to code it. Of course, there is some syntax error here. Right, 30 seconds have passed, so I'm going to try to code it myself. All right. So this is the final solution. This can look very convoluted. I totally get it. So let me, shorten this a bit. Just focus on these two parts. Card wrapper, rather than passing it a title, which is a string. So I'm starting the explanation now. Feel free to pause on your side. You can try it out later. Rather than passing a title as a string here, I am passing another component as a prop and then just rendering it here. Rather than rendering a title here, I am rendering the component itself, and this is where I've defined the component at the end. This component does this. What if this component itself accepted a prop? We will see that very soon. Hold your horses for now. I'm not even sure if this is the right syntax. Let's see. Yeah, this probably isn't. I think it need to do something like this. There you go. Inner component equal to actually render the text component here, which won't actually render it. It will still pass it downstairs here, and here you actually render it. This is one way of solving what I initially proposed. Okay, now I have created the card wrapper in our YouTube live as well. I first created this card wrapper thingy, and then I asked everyone, ki, chalo, you create a card for something, like this. Then other person create a card for something like this. Someone write the logic inside this. And then when I was rendering, I just rendered everyone's different components inside a card. That way I was able to own the style of this card. Again, this looks very ugly. The one on you see in the slides looks much prettier, but you get the idea. Okay, I have been able to define a card. I can give it some padding to make it more pretty. This is a little too much padding, but you get the idea. Okay, this is the card wrapper that I've created, and the contents inside can change. For example, I can define another component here, call it text component 2, hi there 2, and then here I can render text component 2. Inner components are different, but the wrapper is the same. Okay? How are we doing? Are we good? Not good. Can you repeat the wrapper once again? Sure. So what is the problem statement? Okay, any specific questions Q&A में डालना है? I'm sure there's 1-2 specific questions which if I answer, you guys will understand. Oh, lots of lag. Hello, mic testing. The React extension doesn't work, doesn't show me component profile. It says page doesn't be using React. Are you running npm run dev locally? Are you opening it here? I mean, that might just be an issue on your machine. You'll have to debug. Why can't int be a string as well? Something. Why can pass components as props? Can you explain props or children properly? Yes, we're getting there. Okay. 2 minutes to digest. Okay. Cool. Vase, you don't have to digest this. There is a better way of doing all of this. This is just one way you might think of doing it yourself. Even if you don't understand this one, it is fine. The next actual real way to do it, you should understand, which is creating a real wrapper. This isn't exactly a wrapper. I mean, it is technically, you call it whatever you want. This syntax you will never use 99.9% of the time. You will use a different syntax. Let me show that syntax to you. That syntax looks something like this. I have the card wrapper. I render the card wrapper. I don't give it any props, but inside this, I write hi there. I don't need any of these. I say card wrapper. Inside, I write the core meat of my logic. And here, rather than accepting inner components, I accept something called children, which, as the name suggests, means everything written inside. So you always get access to this children variable, which has everything that you have written inside. And if I render the children here, you see the same thing. So this is the cleaner syntax that you need to understand, and this is how you would actually create wrappers in the real world. What is the main important thing here? It is, okay, whenever you write a component inside which you put another component, either a div, or maybe you've created your own component, hello, which does something, you can define it at the bottom. Whenever you have a component inside which you provide a bunch of children, could be a string, could be a div, could be a span, could be another component, you get access to this whole thing in this children variable. Let me just log this children variable and see what gets logged. Hi there gets logged. If this was a div, then some big complex object gets logged here. Props, children, hi there. This children object is what you can render here, and that would basically take this and put it here. This is the right way to create a wrapper. And what do I mean when I say wrapper? I mean writing a single card, the structure of the outer card, the border you want to give, the padding you want to give, and anything inside other people can write. I can now use this card wrapper and define another thing inside, which can be hello there. And now if I see, I have two cards, first one hi there, second one hello there. And if I keep building on it, make the card a little bit cleaner, I can reach the final state of what this website basically wanted, which is a card here, a card here, a card here, which the card I've written once, the inner logic is changing based on whatever is being written here, whatever is being written here. And how did I write the card wrapper? I said, I'm going to accept children as an input. I'm just going to render all of those children as such inside a div. This is the logic that I had to write. This is where I can add more styles if need be. Then children can just get rendered as such. How are we doing? Can we do a map function to the router? You can. मस्त लग रहा, मस्त लैग हो रहा है क्या? Children can the text component also. Yeah, you can pass text component here, which you can define separately. Says hi from the text component. So I wrapped the text component inside a card wrapper. Tomorrow we'll see much more of these when we reach the context API, and we'll see more of these wrapper inside a wrapper inside a wrapper. You can do that here as well. What happens if you really want to get messy here? You can do this. Card wrapper has another card wrapper. Probably shouldn't have introduced this, but you see div inside the wrapper inside the wrapper inside the actual context. Keep going into the first one has this as the children, the second one has this as the children, and that is how the rendering is happening. The only thing to learn here is this. Okay, forget everything. Whenever you're defining a component, you can take children as an input, which represents whoever has called you, whoever has rendered you. If they've passed something inside like this, you can get access to it here. Then you can render it whatever you want. Okay? Might take some time to digest this. I'm not even going to blame you if you don't understand this yet, but important thing to know. Something you need to know. Okay? Let me uncomment. Again, all the code, very similar code you can find in this slide just right here. If you look at the code here also I've done card hi there card div hi from second card, and in the card I've accepted children as an input and rendered it. So feel free to marinate this for a second. We are done with the first part now, and next up we'll move on to the other hooks that I was talking about, use state, use effect, things like these. Marinate it for 30 seconds and then we'll proceed. Very good lag, sir. Okay, let's see. Poll. Do you see a lag? Yes or no? Doesn't really matter. The people who see the lag will not be able to listen to my question, but do you see a lag? Yes or no? Hmm. 27% yes, 30% yes. All right. Going to stop screen share. Going to close a few windows. Let's go to Zoom. Do you still see a lag? Yes or no? Chat is open. No? All right. Good, mostly no. Okay, let's breathe for a bit. Anyways, a few yeses, but mostly no's now. All right. Below this side data, the whole thing re-renders after using memo. That shouldn't happen, Sarvag. Yeah. All right. ठीक है. Checkpoint. We are at a checkpoint. You guys cannot see the screen, but that's fine. Let's let it breathe for a bit. The checkpoint currently is that we have done React. What does React return? We have done re-rendering. We have done keys, and we have done wrapper components. Important things here are probably all of them. You won't need most of these most of the times, but eventually one day you will need them, and when you do, it's good to know them. Now you have to cover 4 more things, which I think we'll be able to cover 3 today at the very least. I don't know, actually we'll see. Use effect, use memo, use callback, and use ref. Let's do a few polls. Abhi वैसे भी the screen is lagging, so I won't share my screen for a while. How many of you, and also share the results in case you're interested here, how many of you already know what use effect is? Do you already know what use effect is? Yes or no? If yes, then this class was probably very slow for you. Oh, okay. 50% no, 50% yes. All right. Do you already know? So it's a 50-50 here. Do you already know what use callback and use memo are as well? Okay, mostly no. So 90% no. Okay. Cool. So I think we should be able to cruise on the use effect bit, but use callback and use memo. 90% no. So which means we'll take it slow. Let me try to share my screen here. I will take doubts at the end, by the way, for people who are stuck in the first 4 things that we've covered. How's the lag? Let me open chat. Do you guys still see a lag? Give me a yes or no. Oh, yes. All right. I see a few yeses. Is children reserved keyword? Can I use it by any name? It is. Or can I use it any name? Can I use any name? No, it is. It's not reserved exactly, but it is the thing that you will. All the children here, you will get access to. In children, you cannot. As you see, I haven't really passed in children here, right? I haven't written children equal to something. Automatically gets put here, so you can't change the name. Time to do a poll again. And if there is a lag, then I'll probably cover the rest offline. Actually, let me try sharing my small screen. That might fix it. Okay. Share screen. Smaller one. How's the lag now? Hello, mic testing 1 2 3. Oh, sorry. Need to do a poll, right? Poll. Is there a lag? Yes or no? Still a lag. 90% is no, which makes me want to continue. So let me continue either way. If you see a lag, just drop off, and you'll find everything in the offline video that'll come after it, as in not the offline video, the recording. If you see a lag, all I can say is I apologize and feel free to drop off. If you don't see a lag, then great. Let's proceed here. Let me bring the slides and the code here and let's proceed. Let's do a quick checkpoint of what we have done. Until now, we have done React returns, re-rendering, keys, and wrapper components. What are we doing next? We are doing a bunch of popular hooks. Now, what are hooks? We will get to eventually, but anything that starts with a use state, use effect, or all these things we're learning is what's called a hook. And the first one, the most important one, is use state, which 50% of you already know. For the rest, until now, we've discussed use state. These are functions that these functions that start with the use are called hooks. Hooks in React are functions that allow you to hook into the React state and lifecycle features from the functional components. So there are a few things here. Let's break it down. Oh, I see the lag locally as well. The first thing it says is, okay, hooks in React are functions that allow you to hook into the React state. This is something we have seen until now. Anytime we have defined a state, how have we defined it? We have defined it using use state. So for sure, use state is one hook that lets you hook into the state, that lets you define state variables and update them. What else does it let you do? And lifecycle features from functional components. What are lifecycle features is a great question. Okay, what these hooks let you do two things. State we understand. They let you hook into the lifecycle features. What are lifecycle features? So I discussed this a few classes ago. Okay, the syntax that we're writing is actually the new syntax to do React. Earlier, React used to be written a different way. In fact, if you go to P5JS web editor, which is a popular library written in React, you will notice the components are written a weird way. If I go to client here, if I open one of these components, let me open index.jsx, or maybe let me search for class. This is a very old sort of code base, I think a few years ago. And here, look at this syntax. What does it say? class nav basic extends react.pure component. It is a JSX file, but it doesn't return a div. It has a render function which actually returns something. This is different from the syntax we have discussed until now. The syntax that we have discussed until now looks something like this: function app, and you return the JSX. And what does this guy do? Class, which has a render function, which returns something. So there is a significant difference as to how React used to be written a few years ago and how it is written today. It's still backward compatible, which means you can still write code like this and it will just work. But no one writes it like this. But when you used to write it like this, there was one very specific thing that happened. Okay, you got access to what are called life cycle functions. Let me paste that here. Let me make it slightly leaner and show you what that looked like. This is how you used to write components for the longest time. Functional components are a new thing after maybe 2019, 2020. Before that, there were class-based components, and this is how you write a class-based component. You define a class, you have a render method inside, and you return something. Okay, very similar. How do you do state Harkirat here? Very weird. You had a state variable here, state equal to something, and then you would update the state here. Very weird. The important thing here is, okay, it gave you access to lifecycle functions, which was on component mount, something like this. You could write on component mount, and if I put an alert here, anytime the component mounted, which means it was actually rendered on the screen the first time, control would reach here and alert would happen. And similarly, there was another one called on component unmount. The names would be slightly different, but some sort of something very close to this. And then, on render, a bunch of these life cycle functions, which is, okay, anytime the component mounts, component unmounts, which means it gets taken away from the DOM, or it re-renders, okay, some state variable change which cause this specific component to re-render, control would reach here. This was the way to do this in class-based components. As we moved over to functional components, which we have been discussing over here for the past few weeks, over there's no easy way to do lifecycle events. There's no easy way for you to know, okay, this got rendered. For that, these hooks were introduced. Okay, these hooks let you do something similar to on component mount or some other lifecycle events. Okay, this was mounted, this was unmounted, and you need access to these very often. For example, if you remember last week we were doing the to-do application where I told you you can't just write fetch over here. You can, but it led to an infinite loop. And I said the way to fix that is using use effect, because use effect is the first lifecycle hook, is the first hook that lets you do a lifecycle event. Okay, when this component renders, do something. Not renders, when this component mounts, alert high. If you write this syntax in your functional component, it is similar to in your class-based component when you write component did mount. The way to know that a component has mounted in class-based components was this. In functional components is this. Now, what is use effect and what is this array and what is this function? We will see very soon. But the reason use effect or a bunch of other hooks were introduced was to hook into the lifecycle events. And what is a lifecycle event? This. These are called lifecycle events in class-based components. Now, God knows what you want to call them, but okay, whenever something gets mounted is one thing. What do I say when I say mount? I mean the first time it gets rendered. It might keep re-rendering again and again, but I don't want this alert to run again and again. I want this alert to run only once. And this is the syntax to write it. Now, how does the syntax work? We'll get to very soon, but let's see if it works as expected or not. I have written function app and I've done export default app. Sorry, I deleted that. Let me write a hi there here. Okay. This is a component, and when this mounts, ideally alert hi should alert, which if I refresh this page and if I look at the console and fix the error, it says alert hi 2 times, not once. We will see why that is. it alerts me twice. Ideally, this gets mounted only once. Do you understand what mount means, by the way? मैं mount करे जा रहा हूँ. Let me share my iPad here. What do I mean when I say mount? I mean, if this is your component, the first time it gets put here is what I mean when I say mount. Now this could re-render 100 times. You could see those bounding boxes 100 times. Then the lifecycle event to mount should not run. But the first time it gets put here, this should run. And similarly, there should be a lifecycle event to run whenever you remove things from here. And that should run only once when you remove this from here and not, on every re-render. Then there might be something that you might want on every re-render as well. We can discuss how to define that lifecycle event as well. But these are what are lifecycle events, and use effect lets you hook into them. Okay? Let's start with the assignment again. Use effect lets you hook into the lifecycle features. This is the syntax at a high level. If you remember the to-do application that we created last week, 5.2, wahan pe we had written the backend for a to-do server. And I told you the way to get the code from the backend is this fetch call, and you have to wrap it inside a use effect, and only then will it work as expected. What is a use effect? You define it, two parts in it. The first is a function, and second is what's called a dependency array. So basically means when should this function run? And if you give it an empty array, it means it should run on the first mount. If I put more values here, if I put to-dos here, then this will run anytime the to-dos state variable changes. But if you give it an empty array, it means just run it on mount. So it's similar to component on mount. Let's do an assignment. Create an app that polls the sum server, gets the current set of to-dos and renders them on screen. So I have created a backend server and deployed it. You can find this is the endpoint that you can hit. And anytime you hit it, it will give you a random list of to-dos. It gives you an object which has a to-dos key, which is an array, and it returns you the title, the description and the ID, and then title, description and ID. You have this backend route. You have to write the code to poll this backend route, which means send a request every few seconds, get the current set of to-dos, and then put them in the state somehow and then render them. That is the assignment. I think that's where we'll call it today as well. We'll discuss use callback, use memo tomorrow. Try to do this yourself. Okay? I am going to slowly do it, but mostly you have to figure this out on your own. I am here on the side. I have given you this much knowledge. Okay, if you write this code, then this will run once the first time the component mounts. You have to write the code that will poll this endpoint every 20 seconds, every 10 seconds, whatever you think that interval might be, and set to-dos, update the to-dos, and then re-render them. Okay, that's all the hint I'm giving. Try to solve it yourself. Meanwhile, let me answer a few questions in chat. And if you do solve it, feel free to, drop off as well, because this is the last thing we'll discuss today. All right, chat is open, guys. All right, a lot of questions. Dependency array, someone asked. Great question. We will understand this better in the next slide when we reach it. But at a high level, this represents when should this run. For example, if I write code like this, const counter comma set counter equal to use state 0, and then button on click equal to set count counter plus plus. If I write code like this, and now I write a use effect, which I say, bhai run this code anytime counter changes, then what will happen? Anytime I click on this button, counter would change, and then the effect would realize, acha, counter has changed. Let me run this code, whatever this code might be. Alert counter, let's say. So this is where the dependency array actually comes into the picture. We don't need it for this problem, but if you go forward in the slides, it'll ask you another thing. This is assignment number 2, which was a take-home assignment. Here you will understand why you need the dependency array and a use case for it. That's a high level of what a dependency array is. Okay. In the real world projects, how keys apply to UUID package or what? Can you please post more podcasts with remote people? In the real world, depends on what you want. Yeah, UUID is probably a good idea to put. Memoization is different from dependencies. Yes, memoization is much different from dependencies. This is when should this control reach here? Memoization is like something else altogether. Can it be int or string as well? Can what be int or string as well? Teju, I don't understand your question. Lag. Let me stop sharing. Looking at the chat a bit and then I'll solve this specific problem. Play the guitar in the back. Someday. You can use NeoVim from now on as you have fulfilled your responsibility to teach NeoVim. Explain memo again. The memo was, let's look at the docs. Memo. I know I'm not sharing my screen. I will try to. The best way to learn about memo is the slides. So if you go to the slides, try to share my screen here, even though I know it's going to. Best place to learn about memo. Go back to the class from today and try to understand it again. But this line sums it up. Memo lets you skip re-rendering a component whenever the props are unchanged, which, as you can see, if you go back to the original slides, here I rendered a bunch of headers and I said title equal to something. These were re-rendering even when I was changing this first title. Nothing that's going inside was changing, yet they were re-rendering. So the way to fix that was, okay, I see the lag myself now. So the way to fix that was wrap the header inside a react.memo. That's a high level of what it does. I've just recapped everything from the beginning. So you'll probably be better off going through the class in the morning. 3152, what is that? Why we mount particular event? I don't understand the question. Do you mean why do you need to understand? Why do you need control to reach somewhere when something is mounted? For example, in this to-do application, right? This to-do application whenever the to-do component renders is when you want to hit the backend and get the current set of to-dos and put them in the state, which is why why we mount particular event. I guess the question is, why do you need the mount event? And the answer is, in any backend application, you want any full stack application, you want a request to go to the backend, get back some data and render it on the front end, which is why you hook onto the mount event. By when are we going to backend again? Not for another week. Next week we'll probably do state management and then we'll probably hit the backend. In real world projects, how keys? Okay, answered that. Yes. Someone said remove strict mode. Yeah, feel free to do this on your side. If you go to main.jsx and remove react.strict mode, you will see. So feel free to do this if you want. You will see the use effect. This use effect will only get called once. If you add it, you'll see it called twice. It's fine. When you deploy it in production, this react.strict mode sort of goes away. But yeah, you will see the effect basically rendered twice right now if you have react.strict mode and if you're running npm run dev locally. All right. If React has reconcilers, then why do we have to write this memo? Great question. Whenever you're writing a library like this, it's harder to tell or write the logic. Great question. I mean, we'll have to look at the code if I'm being honest to understand this. Why aren't the React people smart enough to know that the input hasn't changed? Why do I have to put it inside a memo? Whoever has written the React library should be itna smart to know that this thing is static and you don't need to re-render. I agree, but there's either some limitation as to why this is done, or they want you to explicitly tell them that we have a property that whenever a component renders, all the children will re-render, and if you want a child does not re-render when its prop hasn't changed, you tell us explicitly and we'll do it. So that's a high level of how I can answer that question. Is there any way to revert back kind of thing in use state? What do you mean revert back kind of thing in use state? All right, let me solve this assignment locally, then I'll take more doubts. What is the first thing I have to do? Create a to do component. What does it take as input? Title, description. What do I have to do? Render them here. Title and then description. This is the first thing I have to do. What else do I need to do? I need to define a global state variable, call it to-dos, set to-dos, initialize it to an empty array. What is the third thing I have to do? Write a fetch call here to actually fetch from the backend the set of to-dos. So I can do a fetch. What is the URL to hit? This one right here. Dot then res. You can use either syntax. You cannot, okay, one thing to know probably here is you cannot asyncify a use effect. You cannot write an async function inside a use effect. It will just fail. So you cannot do this. You will have to use the promise syntax. Whenever you're this function, the first argument to a use effect cannot be an async function. There are ways to do it, but not like this. Const JSON equal to await res.json, and then hopefully some of you were able to reach here. How many of you were able to reach here? एक बार बता दो. वैसे तो a lot of people might have dropped off after doing this, but were you able to do this yourself? Yes or no? At least this much. Of course, there's one more thing to do, but oh great, most people were able to do it. Oh no, never mind. Still a good number. All right. To-dos.map to do. Let me finish it and then I'll explain it. Again, this might be one of those things. Okay, if you watch me do it, you'll understand. But if I ask you to do it, you won't be able to. So I would urge you to, after the class, try it out yourself. This is the almost final code. This isn't polling yet, which was the original problem statement. Every 10 seconds you have to ask the server, what are the new set of to-dos? What are the new set of to-dos? We are not doing that yet. We are sending one request when the component mounts, which means the first time this renders, this app renders, the backend request would go out. And if I open this in the browser, you see there is an error. You will see what the error is. To-dos.map is not a function because I get back the response in json.todos. Okay, now refresh. Each should have a unique property, key equal to todo.id. Refresh. If I go to the network tab, the request is going out. I am getting back a bunch of to-dos. Why are they not rendering? Why are they not rendering? Set to-dos. 3, 8. Missing something very obvious here. I have not returned from here, and there you go. So now I've written an app, which anytime I reach here, I see my to-dos. Some of you might be seeing a flash here. That is because you haven't removed react.strict mode. If I add it back here, you will see a flash, and then I see the second one because it sends 2 requests. The control reaches this effect twice, which is why you might see a flash. But either way, the problem statement was, okay, it needs to fetch every 10 seconds. Can you think of how, given this much code, can you figure out how can you send this request out every 10 seconds? Is there an easy way to do it? How many of you got it? So you'll understand where you lie in the class. Let's see. How many of you already were able to understand what I'm asking here, and how would you convert this code into the code which will actually send the request out every 10 seconds rather than just sending it once? Were you able to figure that out? Yes or no? Okay, good amount was. Okay. So 67% were able to. 63, basically 2/3 of the class was able to do it. 1/3 wasn't. The way to do that would be this, right? Set interval 10 seconds. Every 10 seconds, This effect runs once. Control will reach here once. In that once, you say, bhaiya, every 10 seconds, please fetch and get the response and set to do's here. What will this do? Every 10 seconds, it will send a request. Now, if I refresh this page, I see an error because I'm missing something obvious. Let's see. Oh, because set interval will trigger for the first time after 10 seconds. So as you can see, after 10 seconds, I see the first set of to-dos, and then let's wait for 10 seconds. That was a really long time. There you go. I see another set of to-dos, so on and so forth. I'm polling the server. This is one way to do it, right? If you have multiple front ends, if I have a mobile app for a to-do app, I have a web app for a to-do app, I might change something in my mobile app. Then I want to see that change in my web app as well without refreshing. One way to do it is this. Okay, you poll from the backend server from all your clients, the website being one of your clients. Cool. That's a high level of what we wanted to do today. We haven't been able to do everything, which means tomorrow's class and then a bunch of offline videos will cover. Tomorrow we'll basically try to cover then all of this, and then maybe a little bit of proper drilling. So feel free to revise these, look at them yourself. We'll cover all of this again tomorrow. And then in the upcoming week, I'll try to cover the context API and then introduce recoil in offline videos. Cool. All right. Let me look at the chat now. I'm looking at the existing questions. Okay. Going to open the chat again. Going to start a fresh chat. Any questions related to doubts related to the class, guys? Anido. All right, 100 questions. Why should you not use async function use effect? You cannot. If you do it, it'll throw an error. Why? Again, it's a limitation on. I mean, I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but yes, there is a limit. This is a limitation of React. Now there is a library called use async effect that lets you do this. Or if you do want to do it, just call a function here and define an async function main, and then here define whatever, do an async fetch whatever. This is one way to do it. Another way to do it, there's a library, common library, popular library called use async effect. It lets you do the same thing. This is a better way to do it because it does some cleanups which are good to do. All right, I create a components folders like this thing. Memo is not working. It is still everything is getting rendered. Sahil, I think this is what you're missing. I think it's not getting re-rendered if that is the code that you've written. What you're missing is this. I'll tell you what you're missing. Let me copy this. Oh. You might only have like 2 headers. So now when you look at it, it might feel like all 3 are re-rendering. The last one isn't. The parent is re-rendering, this is re-rendering, and this is the last one doesn't have a bounding box. It looks like it has a bounding box because this guy's bottom bar appears here, but that doesn't mean it is actually rendering. The way to actually confirm that is put a bunch of headers and then refresh. And now if you look at it, you will see, there are no bounding boxes here, which means this isn't what individually all of these aren't rendering. Of course, the global box will still be there because app does re-render, but all these individually aren't re-rendering, which is what we want. So try that out, Sahil. Show code. Okay, this is the, there you go. This is the code with the set interval, which is the final thing that we had to do. You'll find it in the gist as well. So if you don't see it here, just look at the gist. It has all the code there as well. But if you want to look at it here, this is the code. Why have you opened a lot of apps like Premiere Pro, Docker? Can't you close temporarily and not use apps? Do you think the lag is because of them? Maybe. I will try that tomorrow. I'll use my other laptop, in fact. How do you unmount a component? I'm assuming you're asking, how do you unmount a component is, when, let's say, I rendered 5 to-dos and then, in the next state update, I made 4 to-dos. Then one of the to-dos got unmounted. And the way to run an effect when something unmounts is something we'll discuss tomorrow, but it is this. Unmount. A use effect. There you go. As you can see, all the to-dos are getting unmounted because new to-dos came in, which is why I see a lot of alerts. But a use effect, if you return a function from it, whenever this effect gets overridden, which means if there was a dependency and this dependency changed, then this will run for the existing use effect. Or if there are no dependencies, then, I mean, we'll discuss this tomorrow. Yeah, let's discuss this tomorrow from scratch. आज के लिए बहुत हो गया. What if we don't have any dependency array? So I think it's just one or two things will happen based on the React version. Either it will default to an empty array, or it will infinitely call your effects. We can see what happens. But you have to always put an array there. I think now it defaults to an empty array. I could be wrong. Let's see. Refresh. Yeah, as you can see, it creates an infinite loop, which is why you need to pass in an array, else this will keep running infinitely. Can we make a small web app, WhatsApp web XMPP protocol? It's highly scalable. Probably not XMPP. I mean, if we do it, we'll do it using WebSockets. Why do you want to use XMPP? It's a pretty archaic protocol now. Because every time to-dos are getting updated, use effect gets called. Then should we use memo with all components? You could say that. Why would you not use memo with all components? I'm sure there's a reason why they have separated it and why you shouldn't use memo in every component. I can't think of it, but I'm sure there's a reason. But put it in every component makes a lot of sense. What is the default state of a component other than use state? What is the default state of a component? There is no state, which means it is a static component. If you don't have any input states and if you don't define a state, then it will just render once and just stay there. It will just sit there forever. No re-renders would happen. Send the code you just wrote. Okay, let me write yellow. Let me justify this. Shorten the URL. This is the link for it. Let me paste as well. All right. Can you tell how to get a job? वाले question मिलेंगे. But if I'm using fragment instead of react.memo, it isn't working. You are saying if you're using fragment instead of react.memo, it is not. Instead of div, it is not working. I don't think that should happen. Let me show you the same thing on my machine. Copy the whole thing. Either you've hit a very weird edge case or you've just not tested it correctly. Fragment, go here. Oh, yeah. See, they're not re-rendering individually, but वो एक line में आ रहे हैं, तो they come together because you've used react.fragment here, which is why it might feel like everything is re-rendering, but still they aren't. Remove use memo. Refresh. Not the outcome I was hoping for. Basically, they aren't re-rendered. These aren't re-rendering. You would see boxes here if they're re-rendered, I'm assuming. Or, this extension only works if you have one div below the other. But yeah, they aren't re-rendering. Even if you're use this. Put a BR here. And now try it. Yeah, as you can see, there is no box here, right? Inside, which means these aren't re-rendering. All right. How do you unmount a component? You don't unmount. You don't mount a component. You don't unmount a component. It automatically happens when something gets put. It means it has mounted. When something gets removed, it means it has gotten unmounted. For example, if we had the to-do logic where you can add more to-dos, remove to-dos. Whenever you're removing a to-do, let's say there are 3 to-dos initially and then there is 0 to-dos after 10 seconds because the to-dos on the servers have refreshed, then you'll say 3 to-dos have been unmounted. Is lifecycle thing like mount, unmount, and re-render under the hood classes being used? Fun fact, it seems like Kyle from Web Development is teaching. Please add Redux also in the course. Makes okay, sounds good. Let me take a screenshot of that. Is lifecycle thing like mount and re-render still under the hood? Oh, and classes are being used? Unsure. Probably not. I don't think so. I don't think this gets converted to class-based components. I don't think so. When in app div/div is replaced with this thing, memo thing doesn't work. Why? Here is काफी लोग बोल रहे हैं. It does work, right? Memoization is working. As you can see, these aren't re-rendering, even though I'm clicking here. Why have you opened a... Okay, answer. Can you tell... Okay, how to get a job. When use ES6 import export CommonJS exports will require... Which one do you prefer? I prefer import exports, generally cleaner syntax. Yeah. It's modern for a reason, right? It's modern. It's been introduced later, so it's probably better for a reason I use it. Just a personal preference. By hook का कुछ घंटा नहीं समझा. हाँ ठीक है कोई बात नहीं. We'll discuss tomorrow. Hooks we'll discuss tomorrow again, so it's fine. Can you explain wrapper component once again? Sure. So कहाँ गई slides? Wrapper components. What is the goal? The goal is to create a single component. When you have that component, you don't have to rewrite the border in all of these things, or the box shadow here and the background color here. You write it in a single place, and then whoever wants to create this thing or this thing or this thing can use your wrapper component. What was the way I said you can do it? I said create a single component, call it card, and this card will take children as an input. And what will it say? It will say, I'm going to render all the children and I'm going to give it some styles, which could be anything, border, 2 pixels, solid black, and padding and bunch of other things. Get as close to this card component here and then render everything inside. And now whoever wants to use it can simply use my card component, and inside my card component, they can write their logic. Ke, haan, bhai, this is a div which needs to have a hi there. Then another div which needs to do something else, and then another component, and so on and so forth. You can put whatever you want inside. And this doesn't get rendered as such. This gets rendered inside this card, because what have I written in card? I've written ke bhai render everything, which means all of this will just reach here. And then, since I've wrapped it inside a div, the div will also put some border outside, and you have created a wrapper component which wraps the other code that is put inside. बहुत लंबा code है. Question on wrappers. Say we have the following wrapper component. Okay, someone has pasted a wrapper component. Let's copy it. The question is, say we have this wrapper component, and if I understand right, during we use the code below, correct? I can use the code below. Oh. But if we are not using children, then are we passing the inner HTML as a prop, correct? No, we are not using children. So this, you can think of this and this to be the same thing. You can either pass children explicitly, or whatever you have written inside is being passed as children. You are not using inner HTML. Hope that answers your question. Good question. How exactly children thing coming inside the wrapper component? Exactly, good question. It is similar to, you can write code like this or like this. It's just a standard, call it prop that React has defined. Okay, bhai, anything you write here can be accessed here as children. You don't have to explicitly give it like this, because it's a slightly cleaner syntax. It's like you're writing HTML when you write A inside B, and that's how children reach below. It's not in the HTML. Why should we use index instead of map why should you not use index of map as a key in React.js? So that is a very dumb way to get around the warning that it shows you. What was the reason for the warning? Let's see. Where are the slides? There you go. It's a good question. Why can't I just use the index as a key? The reason we added key equal to something was कि भाई so that React knows कि भाई ये जो ID है ना, this to do has changed and this to do has updated and this to do has been deleted, so on and so forth. If I just use whatever is the current index here, and if you don't understand it, it's fine. This index basically represents 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. You'll get access to all of these inside this for loop. If I do this, then iski ID I've given as 0, iski ID I've given as 1, ID for this I've given as 2. Now if I move this to the top, React would be like, acha, something. React would be like, acha, the ID 1, title has changed, description has changed. So it will feel like the first one has been updated. But what have you actually done? You have deleted the last one or moved the last one up the chain. So just basically not telling React the right things. You're telling React that the first one has been updated and last one has been updated. But what have you actually done? You have moved the last one up, and then you have second one is unchanged and third one is also unchanged. That's what you've done, right? So when you use this sort of a syntax, you're not telling React the right things. Does it work? Yes. A lot of people in code bases, you'll see this only. Like they'll use this only. Can you tell how to, okay, answer job wale question nahi answer kar rahe yaar. How do you answer that? Why have you, okay, answer that. When in app is replaced with this, answer that. What if we don't have a dependency? Answer that. Can we lever? You can lever, sir. I'm assuming you mean can we leave? Yes, you can. Can you tell me, okay, answer, okay. ये दो बार मत डाला करो सवाल. Only put questions once, guys. I'm trying to answer every question. Next set of questions, please. All right. Please explain the first way to stop re-rendering. What was the first way to stop re-rendering? It was, oh, you move the state down. Try to go to the explanation in the beginning when I went to the iPad and explained, up and down. Try to go there. If you don't understand it still, happy to. Next week we might do a doubt session, so ask it there. But maybe first go there first. Because it's going to be a pretty long explanation. So header with button, this thing. Someone pasted a code. Dependency arrays. We'll discuss use effect again tomorrow, so let's discuss it there. Can you share the syllabus of what we have covered? Let me, I will forget this, but Ruki, if you're on the call, remind me. Okay, let me, we have the original syllabus. Let me mark down what all we have covered until now. Understood everything, but coding time is very fast, so teaching things offline is better because we can take our time in coding. I do agree to this. How to do two-way binding without state lifting, redux, and context? What do you mean two-way binding? Do you mean being able to pass something from parent to child, child to parent, without state lifting, redux, and context? You can't even use redux, you cannot use state management tool, you cannot use context, you cannot use state lifting. How would you pass state from a child to a parent? No idea. If you cannot use any three of these, no idea. Is use effect going to re-render everything just like use state? No. Unless inside the use effect, you actually update a state variable, it will not re-render. You can always confirm this by looking at, the redux tools we've seen. But if you have a use effect, control reaching here does not mean a re-render. Unless you do a set to do's inside, which of course, if you set to do's, update to do's, then of course there will be a re-render. Question what? Did not require JSON schema to render data. Yeah, you don't require JSON schema to render data. Where do you need this? What if we introduce a comment like this or something to prevent React from rendering specific parents? Can we create a function like this so that before using React, this function runs over the components? You can introduce something like a comment or something. No need to render. Not that I've heard of. I think the only way I've heard of, running a specific code only on mount and not in any subsequent re-render is this. I haven't heard of any comment that you can put, okay, don't re-render again and again. And app would understand that this only needs to run once and not more than once. All right. Not in the function, sir, but in the app when this thing is replaced with this. Oh. Okay. Let's try that then. No, it should also work. Let's see. right, let's see. Oh, you are not wrong. Oh, I haven't put the memo here. Const. Memo this thing, huh? This is interesting. Anyone know why this is happening? इसकी तो bounty बनती है वैसे. Huh. Anyone know why this is happening? Anyone know this from the top of their head? Bounty, $50. Anyone know why this is happening? Mohit, we have made like 3 offline videos. You should check those out. Mount and unmount, नहीं मुझे भी नहीं मतलब this is even I don't know. Do you guys get the issue? I know तो बताओ ना भाई. Is wrapper and higher order components the same thing? Sort of, you could say that, but there's a subtle difference. Can you do offline videos on some projects, some more projects? I can do on more projects. Strict mode, someone said. Interesting. You might have just won the bounty if that's the case. I don't think if that is the case, but let's see. Let's don't. Nope, definitely not strict mode. The problem is that everything is re-rendering, even though I have a memo here. And this happens if you have a fragment. Does not happen if I have a div here. So that's the problem. If I put a div here, then it works as expected. Only, this thing renders. But if I don't put a div here, then everything is re-rendering, even though this is inside a memo. I'm sure ChatGPT करके पता लग जाएगा वैसे. I got this error. Not able to see to-dos, but they are visible in the console. Most probably aren't returning. No, you are returning. Return to-dos.map. You need to return. Oh no, this looks fine. Most probably your issue is here. Try to remove this starting brace, curly brace, and move this to-do up a line and see if it works. Let me quickly try this locally only. Oh. Let's see. Oh, sir, you're not hitting the server, right? That's why. And why are you? The hell? Sir, how are you calling set to-dos if you haven't passed it here? This needs to happen here, right? That's your issue. Or pass set to-dos here as a prop. You should see an error that says set to-dos does not exist. Alright, never mind. Back to the original one. अब तक कर लिया होगा ChatGPT बहुत लोगों ने. Let me see if someone already gave the answer. Div not working. Why should you use anti-pattern of state from child? Why should you not use? Why should you not use is a great question. But करके देखो मतलब मैंने बचपन मतलब I have also tried it in the past and I have realized it's leading to some issues and I've read that this is an anti-pattern and not used it. Now why is it an anti-pattern is a good question that I don't have a good answer to. Div serves as a parent. So why do you need a div as a parent? You can't render the whole. Oh, fucking nay. Nishchal Shetty. Why is that name familiar to me? Might have won the error. Won the thing. Oh, wait. Sorry, Kalyan answered before. Sorry, guys. 2-3 people will probably share this bounty. Nishchal, Kalyan. Not closed by single XML. That also looks like a right explanation. How does React determine when to re-render component and what role does virtual DOM play in this process? Let me come back to that. Why should you not? Okay, हाँ ठीक है. तो दो लोगों को मिली है, Kalyan and Nishchay. The answer probably is a weird nuance. For edge case we've hit I also don't know if this is the right answer, but it sounds like the right answer. There is no way for it to re-render this parent because this parent does not even exist in the DOM anymore. It's a fragment, so it has to re-render everything or something like that. Sounds like the best explanation to me, if I'm being honest at this point. I'm sure if you Google more, you'll understand. But that sounds like a good explanation. Let's split the bounty between Kalyan and Nishchay. Okay, back to questions, guys. How to use memo in to-dos? Just memo is a to-do. Memo is a to-do component basically. I mean, देखो यार, memo you don't have to use it very often. You'll see it not being used, for the longest time. You don't use memo. Good to know, but you use them. You should use them, but as someone asked, probably every component should be memoized. Then I sort of agree. There's probably a reason why you shouldn't. Why React sort of makes you explicitly put memoize here, but I can't think of a good reason to not do it for at least these simple applications. Not in function, sir, but in parent app returns when this thing is replaced. Okay, answered that. Please explain again about empty dependency array you're passing to use effect. Let's discuss that tomorrow. We'll do use effect from scratch tomorrow. Okay, don't worry. Chill आज के बहुत हो गया. Not in function, sir. Okay, answered that. Hi. Please explain use effect. We'll do effect tomorrow. Or use effect tomorrow. You said parent will not re-render, but it is re-rendering after using that. No, parent will re-render. Parent always re-render. If there's a state variable change here, app will re-render. You will see a bounding box outside. All of these won't re-render if you use React.memo. All right. Not in a function. Okay, answered that. Difference between use effect and memo. Oh, significant difference, right? What is memo doing? What was memo doing? If you went to the React docs, what did it say? Memo lets you skip re-rendering a component when its props are changed. What was use effect? Use effect lets you run a certain part of a code base that you define here, a function, whenever anything inside this array changes. And if it's an empty array, it means when this gets mounted. But if this has some dependencies, for example, let's say it has first title as a dependency. Now, anytime first title changes, which means, you click on the button, control will reach here. You can confirm that by putting a log inside. Okay. How does, तो भाई आयुष तुमने तो बहुत ही edge case hit किया भाई. How can React determine when to re-render a component? हाँ तो यार वही है. Great question. How can React determine what updates does it need to make? It can either do this. It can be like, what is the current state of the DOM? Let me check. Acha, there is a button here. There is some text here that says my name is Harkirat. There is a bunch of more text here. Let's say a state update happens and you change this to something else. Let's say Harman. Then it will be like, acha, what can it do? It can either hit the DOM, ask the DOM for its current state, then based on the current state of the DOM, figure out ki acha, Harkirat, this line should be changed and then updated. Or the thing is, doing any one of these, right? Document.getElementById are expensive operations. React does not need virtual DOM as such. React can always, check what is the current state and then check what is the state update, figure out the last state and then figure out the diff and then put it here. The purpose of introducing virtual DOM is it has a copy of this in a simple variable that looks like this. Let vdom equal to, button, whatever, an array, or maybe, a div which has a few children. The first one being a div which has the inner content as my name is Harkirat, and so on and so forth. If it has an in-memory representation of the current website, it can easily find the diffs rather than hitting the DOM and finding, acha, this is what the DOM looks like, and then finding the diffs. So that's what virtual DOM lets it do. That's why it maintains a copy of the current DOM in-house, and then it just finds the diffs and understands the things that it needs to update. Now, React code मैंने भी नहीं पढ़ा है. It's not like I know exactly what it does, but theoretically I think, and I'm almost sure that this is how, state updates get propagated to React and get flushed down to the DOM. In to-dos, using a static component by memo and using an app component not working. In to-dos, using a static component by memo and using app in component is not working. Kalyan, sorry, I don't understand the question. Can you share the syllabus? Okay, कर दूंगा ये. Can't we use set timeout with to do as a dependency in dependency array instead of set interval? No. How would that help? You are saying put a set. कहाँ गया? Set timeout here with to do's as a. हाँ, ये भी कर सकते हो वैसे. Not. Yeah, this will work as well. You're not wrong. This will work as well. You can do this. Yeah, you're right. Please explain again about, okay, answer that. Why was I alerted? Because in React strict mode, if you write React.strict mode here, when you're in dev, which means when you're running npm run dev locally, it does a bunch of things to make sure you're not doing some bad things. One of the things it does is it mounts the component twice. And for that reason, you see the control reach here twice. You will not see the same thing in production. If I actually build this project and deploy it, you will not see React.strict mode work so weirdly, but you will locally if you use strict mode here. And for that reason, you can either remove it locally when you're testing this effect, or keep it and just know okay, the effect will run twice. Give me React project ideas. I want to learn about graph databases. Choose a popular graph API, build a frontend on top. Bhai, we can only see your browser window. Couldn't see the code changes after the Q&A happened? Hey? Oh, is that so? It does say desktop here. I don't know. Never mind. Either way, we're at the end of the class, and if that did happen, I will look at the recording and figure it out. Okay, answer that. How do you do it? Okay, answer that. Do we only pass variables as props? If primitive variables can also be passed down, does React memo? That's a great question, Gokul. We will discuss this tomorrow when we discuss use callbacks. You can, and they do trigger re-render, and use callbacks help you prevent them. What is the reason behind compulsory single parent? यार वो तो React वाले ही जानते हैं. The theoretical reason is it makes it easy for React to do reconciliation. The bookish answer is this. What is the real answer? We will have to explore a bit. I'm sure there is a good reason as to why they have. I think one reason you can think of as to why this happens is initially I showed you, right? You can't write two variables together side by side. And if you think about it, whatever you're returning, even though it looks like XML here, it's actually a big object. We discussed this initially, right? The XML gets transpiled into a big object, and then I'm assuming that big object cannot have two different siblings that you can define. It needs to have a single top level parent. Yeah, that might be the reason actually. Okay, when you convert this XML back to the JavaScript that actually creates the parent, you are only, the first thing you have to do there is react.create element, which can only take one element as an input. I'm saying a lot of things here which might not make sense, but that's how I'm trying to understand why that might have been the reason. But this is the reason. This is the thing that happens. Is there a reason? Yes. Can I explain this well right now? Probably not. Do you need to know it? Good to know. Definitely good to know for an interview question, but happy to discuss. Let me write that down. Happy to discuss in an offline video what the real reason is, and maybe even point you to the code base as to where it happens. I think I've figured out a reason in my head, but could be wrong. Let's see. Why single child? Real explanation. All right. Is lifecycle things like mount, unmount, re-render still under the? Okay, answered that. It's not. It's probably not under the hood using class-based components. Set timeout. Give me React project that I can practice on. Nia, and also learn Neo4j. I want to learn about graph databases. What is a good graph database project? Try to create like, yeah. So all the popular websites after Facebook introduce the graph API, like all popular social networks probably give you some sort of a graph API. Try to pull those. There are standard use cases where a graph-based database makes a lot of sense. Try to use those, and that's the high level of what I can think. Like if you create some graph database is also sort of popular in machine learning these days. Maybe find an application there. That's a high level of what I can think of in terms of projects. Okay, chalo ji. Let's call it here. Tomorrow we will redo use effect and a bunch of other effects. All right. Oh, someone has answered in Q&A. Let's see. Someone I think answered why you need a single child. We can't dependency because it's an infinite loop. No timeout, only once works. Set interval. Miss ho gaya bhai. Just tag me on Discord. I'll look at it. All right. See you guys tomorrow, guys. बहुत ज़्यादा नींद आ रही मुझे भी किसी ने नींद नहीं लिखा है. All right. Tomorrow, guys. Bye bye.